Have you ever wondered what Andrew Tate would be like if Andrew Tate's head was a disco ball? I'm sure we've all wondered this from time to time. Well, you don't have to wonder anymore. Recently, I came across this masked weirdo on TikTok. I would say he's basically a clone of Andrew Tate in every way. He gives the same type of terrible dating advice that Andrew Tate gives, and he absolutely loves to talk about trans people while knowing absolutely nothing about trans people. But the thing that sets this guy apart from Andrew Tate is that he wears a mask. It's like that show, The Masked Singer, except instead of singing, he says dumb shit. I can tell that this dude thinks wearing this mask makes him seem like really edgy and mysterious, but really he just looks like some random weirdo who threw on a ski mask and then glued a bunch of pieces of gum to his face. I also noticed that in all of his videos he wears these dress shirts that he unbuttons extremely low to show off his chest, which I find a little bit confusing because if this dude is trying to market himself to other dudes, why is he showing off his chest to them like this? It's a little bit scandalous. It's a little bit revealing. I don't know if Jesus would approve of what he's wearing right now. Clearly, Disco Ball Head here has never heard that modest is hottest. Now, I am not saying that him showing off his chest to other men is gay. I am definitely not saying that it is gay to show off your chest to other men. I am not calling this disco ball-headed man gay. Men should be able to show off their chests without being accused of being gay. I am not saying that he wears a disco ball on his head because he's trying to make himself look like a gay man from a gay disco club from the 70s. I would never say something like that. But it is good to know that if I want to market my content to men more, I just need to show off a little bit more of my titties. So to any men watching, I'm sure you really want to hear my misogynistic opinions right now, don't you? I bet you want to buy my online course that'll teach you how to be an alpha high-value man, don't you? Yeah, you want to be a high-value alpha? Yeah, you like that? All right, sorry, I'm sorry for all that. Anyway, let's get into watching some of his videos. I'm not going to refer to him by name because people like this dude thrive off of getting attention when you spread their name. I think one of the reasons Andrew Tate became so popular is because everyone was talking about him on social media, so I don't want to give this dude any more attention than I have to, so I'm just going to refer to him as Disco Head.
Why are there no trans men fighting to be in men's sports? It's simple. Trans men aren't winning in men's sports.
So right off the bat, he's just straight up wrong. There are tons of trans men fighting to be in men's sports. The reason this dude hasn't heard about the trans men competing in men's sports is because conservative media doesn't flip the fuck out about trans men in sports. And I don't want to get into like the whole trans sports debate in this video. Figuring out how to like segregate sports is incredibly complicated, but in general, I think it's totally fine to segregate sports based on gender as long as you make sure that people have the proper hormone levels to compete in those gender categories. The fact of the matter is, there is no perfectly fair way to segregate sports because there are always going to be people who have advantages over other people. Like, should we start segregating basketball based on height because taller people have an advantage in basketball? I don't know, maybe. But contrary to all the fear-mongering that conservatives do, there is no massive epidemic of trans women winning women's sports. If hypothetically in the future trans women do start dominating every single women's sport, then maybe we will have to make like stricter rules around hormones or something, but for the time being, this is all really just fear-mongering. And this dude clearly has no idea what the fuck he's talking about because there are just as many trans men trying to compete in sports as there are trans women.
So there's no reason to fight for it. No one wants to fight to participate in things that bring them zero recognition in society.
Of course, people fight to be a part of things that don't bring them recognition in society. Seeking fame is not the only motivator that people have. A lot of trans men want to compete in sports just because sports are fun. Only an incredibly small percentage of athletes compete at a level where they're gonna get some sort of fame and recognition.
The reason trans women fight to be in women's sports is because they want to fight for the one thing which brings them recognition in their lives. The ability to come in first at tournaments, which in turn furthers their career.
Again, this is just straight up not true. Trans women aren't competing in sports just for the sake of winning. They also compete in sports because it's fun and because it helps them stay healthy. There are some trans women who compete at a very high level, and that's totally fine. Until trans women start universally dominating sports on a competitive level, I really think this is just fear-mongering.
They were really fighting for acceptance of their identity. We'd see just as many male trans athletes making national headlines as we do female trans athletes for the exact same reasons. But we don't, because once again, they're not just fighting for acceptance. They're fighting so that they can become influential in the world.
The reason why you don't see a lot of headlines about trans men competing in sports is because it doesn't play into this narrative that trans women are trying to infiltrate women's spaces. And there actually have been stories where trans men are forced to compete against cis women because schools have anti-trans policies in place. And when trans men are forced to compete against cis women, they actually have a higher likelihood of beating the cis women because they have higher levels of testosterone. So if we segregate sports based on sex instead of based on gender like conservatives want, then there will be trans men competing against cis women who will have an advantage over these cis women, which just loops back around to the fact that there is no perfectly fair way to segregate sports. But really the ultimate goal of a lot of conservatives is to just make it so trans people can't compete in sports altogether. Just like a lot of bathroom bills proposed by conservatives will just lead to trans people not being able to use bathrooms in public. Because when trans men go into cis women's bathrooms like these proposed bills tell them to, people freak the fuck out because trans men look like men walking into women's bathrooms. So a lot of these conversations about fairness really just boil down to how can we remove trans people from public by any means necessary. And one more thing, at the end he says that these trans women are looking to become influential in the world like it's a bad thing, but usually a message that is preached by these high-value men types is that you should try to become influential in the world. That's literally what it means to be a high-value man to them. So I guess according to them, it's good for a high-value man to try to become influential, but if a trans woman wants to be influential, that's evil. Trans women should just be able to live lives and exist as people. If a trans woman wants to try to become influential, they should be allowed to do that. And if a trans woman just wants to blend into society and be just a normal person, they should also be allowed to do that. And if you want to preach that men should try to be high-value men, then trans women should also be allowed to be high-value trans women.
Do me a favor and watch this video.
Do you a favor and watch this video? Why are you asking random people on TikTok to do you a favor? If you make good videos, people are gonna watch the videos. You don't need to beg them to watch it at the beginning.
What pronoun should I use?
You should use they, them pronouns. So you saying that you
And what
don't
if I
believe
don't?
me,
What if I don't?
that is an act of violence to intentionally misgender someone.
Misgendering someone is not an act of violence.
So I think my opinion on this is that I wouldn't call misgendering someone an act of violence necessarily, but I do think that purposefully misgendering people does contribute towards a society where violence towards trans people becomes more normalized. You see this across the board with various marginalized groups, that the more hate speech towards those groups increases, the more violence towards those groups increases. And of course, when you say something like that, dudes like this will say that you're overreacting and that you're triggered and that you're woke or whatever. But in another video that this dude posted, he straight up said that we need to use authoritarianism to crack down on trans people.
Now, I'm becoming less convinced these social norms will come about via civil dialogue. It's going to require something worse than that. Something which involves one group imposing its will over other groups.
And this is exactly the type of doublespeak that these types of people do. On one hand, they want to paint us out like we're overreacting and that nothing bad is going to happen towards us and that we're all just triggered. But on the other hand, they literally advocate for using authoritarianism to crack down on us. So no, we are not overreacting. You are literally admitting admitting that we are not overreacting.
If you're someone who thinks that misgendering someone equals violence, you're essentially saying that we should outlaw the ability to offend others.
No, this is just not true. Not every single person who thinks that misgendering someone is an act of violence would say that therefore we need to make it illegal to misgender someone. Personally, I do not think it should be illegal to misgender someone. I think that's infringing on freedom of speech a bit too much. But like I said, I do think that purposefully misgendering trans people does contribute to a culture where acts of violence towards them becomes more common.
Here's the truth. Your feelings and your trauma aren't my problem. Neither I nor 99.9% of the population give a flying f about where you come from or what you've gone through.
I just don't get it. Why do dudes like this see it as like a virtue to be an asshole who doesn't give a fuck about anyone else? I feel like even back when I was raised in a conservative Christian household, we were taught that like being nice and being polite towards people is a good thing to do, and that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. When you don't give a fuck about anyone else, no one's gonna give a fuck about you, and that leads to a society where everyone just suffers more for no reason. Like, I'm sorry if it makes me some sort of woke pussy to want to live in a society where like we do care about other people. I don't know, I just think this whole I don't give a fuck about anyone but myself is just fucking cringe, and it just leads to a society where everyone is suffering. I just hope this attitude of people only caring about themselves dies off.
And mind you, the same goes both ways. My full expectation is that you should give zero f***s about where I come from and what I've gone through, because who gives a fuck? By approaching the world in this way, it forces both you and I to learn a certain level of resilience against the critiques of others. And if you can become impervious to the opinions of others, you become more powerful and more capable of going out into the world and getting what it is that you want.
I don't know why he's acting like these two things are mutually exclusive when they're not. You can care about the things other people go through and build up resilience so that you're not worrying about what other people think of you. Because I agree with him to a certain extent that you shouldn't let other people's opinions of you dictate your life, but that doesn't mean that you should turn off your own empathy towards the experiences of other people. That just doesn't make any sense at all. And again, this like completely goes against the core teachings of Jesus, who you think these people would want to be like. Because Jesus' main thing was that we should care for others and we should care for the poor and the needy. But then assholes like this dude come along and say, you shouldn't care about anyone but yourself. You can care for others, care for the poor, care for the needy, while still having self-confidence and not worrying too much about what other people think of you.
So if you're trans and someone misgenders you, let them. Let them suffer with the inner turmoil, because that inner turmoil will create a real, concrete possibility of changing their ways, whereas your weird equating of words with physical violence will not.
Again, it's not equating words with physical violence, it's saying that words can contribute towards physical violence. If someone misgenders you, I don't think that you should like allow that to like ruin your whole week or something, but I also don't think you should just roll over and let people misgender you with absolutely no pushback, because again, having self-respect is about striking that balance between not letting the things other people say get to you too much while still having a backbone and being able to stand up for yourself. Because if trans people don't stand up for themselves, that will contribute to a culture where people like this spread messages saying that we need to use authoritarianism to crack down on trans people.
Do me a favor and watch this video.
If you keep telling me to watch the videos, I'm gonna stop watching the goddamn videos.
Women's rights, but we can't define what a woman is. But also men can be women. And no uterus, no opinion. But also men can get pregnant.
This type of logic is the result of the concept of individualism gone awry. We have gone so far down the road of supporting the sacredness of the individual that cognitive dissonance has become the rule rather than the exception, because people's identity can be based on anything they feel at any given moment. So what's the alternative? We need to return to a certain amount of collectivism.
So, in the last video, he said that everyone should not give a fuck about anyone else's experiences or anyone else's trauma, and that people should only care about themselves. That is the definition of individualism. Now he's saying that we need to return to collectivism because trans people are going too far. So when it comes to being an asshole who only cares about yourself and your own needs, that's when individualism is good. But when it comes to trans people just wanting to exist as themselves, that's when individualism is bad. And the only time that we should rely on collectivism is when we can collectively come together to stop trans people from being trans. We don't want to use collectivism to, like, I don't know, give people health care or make sure that workers aren't being exploited. No, then we need to rely on individualism where it's every man for himself and everyone can just fuck over everyone else. But when it comes to trans people, that's really when collectivism is necessary.
Where there are agreed upon social norms in society. Now, I'm becoming less convinced these social norms will come about via civil dialogue. It's going to require something worse than that. Something which involves one group imposing its will over other groups. So the question is this. You obviously have an opinion on how the world should work. What are you willing to do to make sure that your opinion is the winning side?
So here he's saying that we need to move past having a civil dialogue and start forcing other people into submission. But in another video, he said that he thinks it's bad that people get thrown in prison for expressing their freedom of speech.
Last year, 400 people were arrested in Russia, a totalitarian government, for what they said on social media.
Wouldn't the reason that you want people to have freedom of speech be so that we can have a civil dialogue and we don't need to throw people in prison for the things that they say? I just honestly do not understand what this dude believes. It just feels like his ideology is all over the place. I think it really just boils down to the fact that this dude is a massive hypocrite. He wants to be able to express himself and be able to share his opinions and not get censored on social media and not get thrown in prison for expressing his opinions, and he wants to have individualism for himself where he can get rich and just say fuck everyone else and not care about anyone but himself. But when trans people want to have that same ability to express themselves and not be censored and get to live whatever life they want to live, that's when we need to all collectively come together and force them into submission. You would think that if dudes like this cared so much about having freedom of expression and being free to express their opinions, they would extend that to trans people, but of course they don't. In my opinion, we should use individualism to allow people to be themselves and express themselves, and we should use collectivism to build a society where everyone's needs are cared for. Because yeah, I want a society where everyone isn't just a selfish asshole who only cares about themselves. Hopefully over time, Andrew Tate and these types of dudes will continue to lose popularity, but I guess as long as there are dudes out there who enjoy being selfish assholes, there will always be dudes like this out there to market themselves towards them, with their disco ball heads and their nice low-cut shirts. At this point, I don't think there's really much else to say about Disco Ball Head. Hopefully he'll never gain any sort of real relevance in the way Andrew Tate did, but I appreciate you sticking around till the end of the video, and I'll see you next time.